Chapter 1. In the beginning. Slowly, a figure entered the courtyard, moving as if it were tiptoeing in order not to be caught. It walked all the way to the sitting room and found its way to the room. Grandma was scared when she heard someone silently making a sound but couldn't decipher who it was. She thought it was one of these village boys who would stop at nothing to disturb the neighborhood. She wasn't sure she heard rightly though, so she slept back waiting to hear more clearing sounds to know what next to do. She tried lying back on her bed when she jacked up again after hearing a plate fall off the cabinet in the kitchen. She couldn't hold it back. She reached out for her walking stick, which served as a third leg for her to conveniently limp round the house. She was though a petty trader, but would occasionally take some days off to have enough rest. She limped to the kitchen and saw that it was her granddaughter, Anna, making all those sounds all along. She wanted to hit her with her walking stick for making her go through the trouble of walking all the way down to the kitchen, but she held her anger back when she saw the innocent-looking girl's face rushing to fetch her food from the pot. She had left the house since morning to do some menial jobs to support her grandma financially, being a Saturday, so she was by now very famished and didn't even notice her grandma was standing by the kitchen entrance. She fetched a mountain of porridge for herself and turned around to go back to the sitting room when she startled at the sight of her grandma. She asked what her grandma was doing standing by the kitchen entrance but didn't wait to hear her respond. She left her grandma right there and headed straight to the sofa, focusing on the porridge before her. Grandma then went back to have her beauty sleep. The village doctor had earlier visited her for her usual checkup and treatment and had warned her not to deprive herself of enough rest and sleep. She wasn't of course going to deprive herself of having a well-lived long life. She was making sure she stays hale and hearty for her granddaughter, since she appeared the only family member left for her. Anna had lost her parents since she was just 4. Her parents lived in a nearby town next to their village, so they visited their grandma often and would make sure her needs were met. She had got used to grandma before her parents' death because of the previous constant visits, so it wasn't much of a problem for Anna to start living with her grandma after the death of her parents. She had to leave her father's house after her parents' properties were convicted by the government. It was said that her parents was involved in some dirty business which led to their early death and properties change of ownership. It wasn't easy for Anna to be just fine and schooling without her parents being alive, but the presence of her grandma made it a little easy for her. Grandma had been struggling so hard to make ends meet, she didn't want her granddaughter to feel the absence of her parents. Despite her hard work as a petty trader, she still couldn't fend for their needs alone, and that explains why Anna still had to do those menial jobs for money. She had started doing these jobs every weekend since she clocked 15. Her grandma was initially against this, but she managed to convince her when she couldn't afford Anna's junior WAEC fee and needed an extra hand to complete the said fee. Anna was now in SSS 3 and would soon be preparing for her senior secondary school external examinations. Her grandma was already worried, for she wouldn't be able to pay her granddaughter's external exam fee no matter how hard she worked. She tried joining some thrifts to see if they would be able to loan her money whenever it was time to pay the exam fee, but it wasn't successful. This was because they were feeding from hand to mouth and could barely save up some money for 24 hours. Grandma had sold all her farmlands while paying her granddaughter's school fee from her elementary level to the very last class in secondary school. Now she was left with no more lands to sell and was already contemplating selling her house and packing out to live in a one-room space at a very cheap price, just so she could afford Anna's external exam fee. Anna saw this and walked up to her grandma to tell her not to worry, and that she had turned into a lady who would work so hard to ease her grandma of the stress of having to cater for her as the only family member that she knew and had left. Mrs. Williams, a woman who seldom visits the village to check her farm produce, was visiting the village again for her regular farm checkups and weeding. She was a university professor, but wasn't collecting enough to cater for her needs, her children's needs, and that of her extended family. So she decided to make farming a side business for herself. She would always go at the end of every month to check how her farm was in general and how right her farm manager was managing the work and the workers on farm. She would also use that medium to check Anna's grandma and how she was faring with her little granddaughter, who was now grown and ready to leave secondary school. She would also sometimes give grandma money to care for her herself and her grandma. She knew grandma would by now be struggling to feed both herself and her granddaughter after the death of her son, so she would always help and gift her things out of the little she had. This was sure going to be another great visit, as the villagers were always ready to receive her should she at any point in time pay her a visit.
Mrs. Williams was on her way to the village when her vehicle broke down and needed a roadside mechanic as quick as she could get one. So she tried walking down the road to see if she would find a mechanic. There, she found an old colleague of hers who was now married but without kids. She hid her face for the fear of she being asked about her presumed kids, which she was expecting by faith. But Mrs. Williams knew her at the glance of her back view and could swear she was the one. So she called her by the name she bore in school. Olaose become Janet. The woman at that point knew she could no longer hide from Mrs. Williams, so she turned around with a big fake smile on her face. They exchanged pleasantries and she finally faced her fears when she was asked about her husband and kids. She simply replied, "They are fine." Thank God Mrs. Williams didn't push further. She just asked where she could get a mechanic urgently, and Janet immediately called her mechanic, who was just around the corner for her. He had just left some few minutes before then, after he had finished checking Janet's car, so it was easy to have him make a U-turn to fix Mrs. Williams' car. They stood there till the mechanic arrived at the place and followed Mrs. Williams to where her car was parked. Before the mechanic's arrival, Janet had told her old and longtime friend, Mrs. Williams, to help her look for a maid after she learnt about her friend's destination. She knew her friend could help her get one easily from the village, so she trusted her with the maid selection. By the time her mechanic was done with Mrs. Williams' car, she had already lost track of time reuniting with her friend. She initially thought their conversation was going to south after talking about their families because she had no child and thought she was going to be mocked for it, but it didn't. Mrs. Williams was too old for that and would rather talk about more important things, so she ended up enjoying their conversation and ensured they exchanged contact. Mrs. Williams continued her journey to the village, moving faster than her usual speed because she had a lot of distance to cover before nightfall. In 5 hours, she was already at the village boundaries. She then decided to check on Anna's grandma like she would always do. It was already 7 p.m., so she wanted to just spend 10 minutes with Anna's grandma before going to where she always lodged. She entered and met Anna and her grandma crying and having a heart-to-heart conversation. She got inside without knocking the iron door they had, and that was why she caught them in such state. As soon as Mrs. Williams got in, they wiped their tears and started smiling. They were talking about how Anna would end her education in her present class because they couldn't afford university education even if they wanted to, struggle for the external exam fee Anna wanted. They got so emotional about Anna's dream of becoming educated and a renowned racer being truncated because of lack of fund. Mrs. Williams sat down with them and asked them what was wrong, but they kept quiet and continued acting up to cover up the fact they were crying before their visitors' arrival. She then told them that she had already seen them crying before they became aware of her presence. It was then Anna knelt and begged to work as her maid. She said she needed to save up for her senior WAEC fee and her university education. Grandma also spoke up and said she had apparently been thinking of how her granddaughter was going to complete her education and become great in life, and this thought would always make her teary any time it came up. She then begged Mrs. Williams to please consider her daughter for the position of a laborer on her farm. She didn't want Anna to leave her for the city yet, so she begged for her to be employed back in the village. Mrs. Williams took in a deep breath and said one of her trusted friends was in dire need of a housekeeper and that it would be better if Anna took that job so she would have some time to read and study hard for her exams and also save up for her university education. She further said the family was rich and would pay her well so long she put on her best behavior over there and faced her job squarely. Grandma was hesitant to give her consent, so she asked that she be allowed to think about it and give her a reply later. By the time Mrs. Williams was done calming Grandma and Anna and making sure they were not as they were when she got in, it was past 10 p.m. in the night and was advised to sleep at theirs because of the ritual which was to begin around that time. She stayed back and was glad to spend the night in Anna's room. She was well entertained with the little they had, and she left for the reason she traveled down to the village the next day, with the promise that she would check on Grandma when going back to the city to hear her response and probably take Anna along with her. Anna couldn't sleep the whole night. She was busy thinking of what she would do to convince her grandma that she would be just fine in the city. Besides, she had by now forgotten what it felt like to live in the city and would accept just about any opportunity to have a taste of city life again. At 4 a.m. in the morning, she forced herself to sleep because she knew she had to be in school as early as possible. Anna was very athletic, so she would wake up very early in the morning to jog round the village square every day. She had always dreamt of becoming a racer, but she couldn't do much because she was living in the village. Anna couldn't jog as usual this time around as she slept very late and had to be woken by someone so she wouldn't be late to school. Grandma spanked her bottom and had her awoke by force. She checked the time, knew she would be late to school if she didn't hurry up to dress up for school, so she picked up a bucket, fetched some water and had her bath. Despite hurrying up, she still got to school late and was beaten by her teacher for this. Anna participated in the inter-class race competition they had during their school long break and won the race for her class. She was happy as she trekked home after school. She wanted to relate how she won the inter-class race competition for her class to her grandma, so she walked hurriedly. She slowed down her walking pace when she remembered the previous night's discussion and how her grandma was yet to consent to she traveling with Mrs. Williams to the city. She then prayed that her grandma allows her to follow Mrs. Williams back to the city as she brightened her mood and returned to her walking pace.